In March of 2026, after record sales numbers, EA announced layoffs to Battlefield Studios. And if y'all didn't know, I'm somewhat of a kind of a Battlefield homer. I played every single game since Bad Company 1 and have really became a huge fan of the series ever since 2011 with Battlefield 3. And Battlefield was like my main game during the Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, and Battlefield 1 eras. I also played a bit of Battlefield 5, but at that point I had moved on to Apex Legends as my primary game. And so I think it's pretty safe to say that I know Battlefield. Frankly, I love Battlefield. And when Battlefield 6 came out in October, it felt like a return to form at first. But the more and more I played, I realized there was just something missing, and it wasn't the gunplay or it wasn't the scale of the maps or anything. It just was the main core soul of the game. Now, I think it's kind of hard to compare Battlefield 6 to previous Battlefields because there's obviously an attempt for Battlefield 6 to conform with Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4. And frankly, I think it's almost there. And so I've come up with 4 things where I think if Battlefield Studios was able to modify the game with these 4 takeaways in mind, I think the game would be vastly improved and you would start to see a return of that soul into what makes Battlefield great. And so this first takeaway is the community. If you were to get in a time machine and went back to 2009 and 2010, you would see a very big difference in between the focus on multiplayer games then and multiplayer games now. They're really trying to recreate that couch play era where everyone would go over to someone's house and play together next to each other. They wanted to bring that online. And so you really saw an emphasis on players interacting with each other through the game. And the most obvious thing that every gamer who played games back then notices is pre-game lobbies. Now, yes, pre-game lobbies can be quite chaotic and a lot of bad things were said in them, as every gamer knows. But to me, that is not really a reason to not have pre-game lobbies or peer-to-peer interaction whatsoever. I think companies should just ban people who misbehave, and there should be a reporting system for people who, take things too far. And I think what I'm seeing in the gaming community right now is a lot of gamers are wanting interaction with each other. And frankly, I just think we're not really getting it right now with any of the major titles besides one that I think does it really well and is living proof that gamers are yearning for interaction with each other. And that's Arc Raiders. In Arc Raiders, you don't have pre-game lobbies, you're not thrown in, but you are thrown into a sandbox map and you have the proximity chat where you can interact with all sorts of people. And if you go on YouTube, I would say the most popular videos is just gamers goofing around with each other in the sandbox of Arc Raiders. Sometimes they help each other, sometimes they betray each other, sometimes they all get a huge group together and unite to defeat the matriarch. And you look at these videos, you see people laughing and cutting up, making jokes, just enjoying themselves. And to me, this interaction, this ability to be able to banter with people, with gamers who have similar ideas to you, who are likely interested in similar things, is really valuable. And so a lot of multiplayer games now that kind of flows off that interaction whatsoever with the fear of you don't want people to be abusive. I think it's noble, but I just think it's like overly broad. I'm not saying there shouldn't be any moderation whatsoever, but I am saying that I don't think you should just ban voice chat altogether because some people misuse it. And I think this sort of interaction is a good way to keep engagement in your game, because I do think it's part of the entertainment loop in every session. And so how I would design my Battlefield session is I would want to play Conquest for like 20-30 minutes and then take a break. And I think these breaks are important because it allows you to be able to set your loadouts, maybe banter a little bit with the opposing team that you just went up against, maybe vote on maps, vote to ban items. That'd be kind of a unique little thing you could add. And just overall, just take a break from just constantly playing the whole time so you don't get too fatigued. Now, after this break, when we're loading into another match, I think it's important that it is a persistent lobby. And this means that you're playing with the exact same people that you were playing with in the last game. And it's not randomly rolling a bunch of random new players in unless, you have people leave that lobby. And I think this is really important and very underrated part of multiplayer gaming, is because you want people to recognize person's gamer tag. Like if you're doing really well in a game and you just see somebody that you're constantly killing, that's kind of feels cool in a way too. But also on the other side, if someone's doing really well, you notice them on the scoreboard and then you kill them, then that's more valuable than just a regular kill in the game. It feels like an achievement to actually finally get that upper hand on that one guy. And I think it feels better when you have multiple games of that and not just one game of that, because there is a system in the current game, which it was also in previous games, where it tells you like your record against a certain player. And so in Battlefield 6, it's not like completely removed from the game. There are aspects of this inside the game. I just think they could do it a little bit better. And part of it's kind of related to my next section, but I think most of it just needs to be like just kind of tweaking things with how it looks on the post-game matches, and also like the icons of each person's rank. You know, right now it's just numbers, whereas in previous Battlefields you could see like the specific icon of the rank, and I think that's also an important underrated aspect there. And so it's really just these little changes that I think make a big impact and could really, you know, turn a corner for Battlefield. But I think if you could have these things in there that could increase engagement, maybe increase banter between players, it would stop a situation where people end a game and they immediately just jump on their phone and they start looking at TikTok or Twitter or whatever. And I think when you're just like loading a game after game after game, it just like gets really old after a while, and it's just kind of tiring without a break. And if you make the player themselves take a self-imposed break, I bet you they're more likely to quit altogether, because that is kind of how I feel. And so just to round out this section, yeah, I know a lot of my critiques here are just small changes, just changing the rank icons, but I do think a lot of them will improve the overall player experience and help increase retention over time. And I think Arc Raiders is a great example that people yearn for this type of community, and we can't let just the few bad actors ruin it for everybody. And so I think if you implement these changes, try to get as many people talking as you possibly can in a lobby. I think it will really help the experience overall. And, you know, I think you'll see players stick around a little bit more, or have a desire to interact with people inside the game and load up the game again on another given night. Okay, so my next takeaway is the user interface. And I think a lot of you guys will probably think that this is the main thing that Battlefield 6 needs to fix. But as of late, it seems the overbearing, non-user-friendly user interfaces are par for the course in this industry. When you load up Battlefield 6 for the first time, you're not greeted with a "thanks for your purchase." You're not greeted with a "welcome to our game," which it is a $70 game after all. Global economy isn't all sunshine and rainbows, so, you know, you would kind of want to expect something like that. But the first thing you're greeted with is a "give me more money, buy the battle pass, buy all this other shit." And when you get past that screen, you're greeted with even more ads right before you even can play the game. And it's not like this is Fortnite where it's free to play. You paid $70 for this game. You paid $70 to have ads everywhere, taking up almost the entire screen right when you load up the game. I cannot condemn this enough, because it immediately tells the player what this game prioritizes. It's prioritizing monetization before immersion, and that's a really bad first impression for a $70 title. And it just sends the player the message: you are nothing to me but a number, a thing to extract value from, nothing more. And so big companies out there like EA and Activision, if you're wondering to yourselves, how is the indie industry right now? How are these indie studios just killing us? Like, how is Arc Raiders just popping off with a studio that just started a couple years ago? And it's really just, it's as simple as this. Look at the screen right now. Look at what you're looking at. Most of this is an ad. Most of this is not focused on the gameplay whatsoever. And this is like the main lobby. This is supposed to be the main area you're supposed to hang out in before you jump into a game. I mean, it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of what the word lobby means, you know? If you walk into any business out there, that like a bank or anything, they have lounge chairs out there in the lobby. You know, they want you to be relatively comfortable for sitting in a bank. And some games have done this really well. Like the first time you load up Black Ops 1, bro, that is probably the best I've ever seen a lobby be in any video game I've ever played. It sends the message off right away what you're in for with this game. And with Black Ops 1, you are in for a trip. But unlike Black Ops 1, what the lobby conveys with Battlefield 6 is that this is just an economic vehicle for us. You know, we don't really care about the immersion. We don't really care about anything. We just care about selling as much battle passes as we possibly can. You know, it kind of reminds me, this whole situation with AAA gaming kind of reminds me of the idiom, you know, they're putting the cart before the horse. You know, if they focused on the immersion and they just so happen to have a battle pass as well, they would sell more battle passes in the end. You know, as an Alabamian, someone who I really look up to is Nick Saban. His big thing about anything you do in life, that there's a process to doing things, and how winners aren't just built in a day, but they're built on the practices in the summertime, the practices each and every day you did up until the game, how you prepared, what you ate. Every little thing matters. And then all of that comes together when you actually play the game and hopefully come to a favorable result. But if you worry so much about the game, if you worry so much about winning right now, then you'll never get there, right? Because you didn't do the necessary things it took to be a winner. And that's kind of his whole maxim, I would say, with Nick Saban, is process of doing things. And here with gaming, the process to developing a game, the process of getting these little tiny things right, all will add up in the end. So with that said, I think while there's a lot to improve on with the UI, I do think if they do little things and improve on the already good things that they have, which there are some, you could create a really good system and a really great product for your consumer. I think some of the best UI aspects in this game are personified in the profile screen. And if you go on Reddit into the Battlefield 6 subreddit, you'll just see a bunch of people posting their profiles and stuff. And I think that's a great thing. It has all the stats you can possibly think of that you would want to see in there. You know, it has your revives, your kills, the types of gun that you've mastered, your rank, everything you need is right there. And I really think it's just really well done. I like how on the right side of the screen, they have this like chart where it shows the amount of times you've played a certain class. I think that's really cool. And so they just really did a good job with this. And I think they also did a good job with the class screen and the gun screen where you're attaching attachments to your weapons. All that is very intuitive and just makes sense. You know, you don't need to over engineer that kind of stuff. I don't think they did. So I think that's really well done there. And so just to round out this section, I do think this is an area of the game that needs significant improvement. And I'm not sure if it's going to be possible for them to improve this with EA at the helm, which they'll probably just blame that Battlefield's an outdated genre, or just look at Battlefront and how that failed too. But that also had a very predatory monetization style as well. And so they'll just, you know, be in denial about it. But heck, you can't make a company want to succeed. I guess if they would want to succeed at some point, they should probably listen to the people who buy their games. My next section is the movement mechanics. The movement in this game is just quite normal, frankly, but there is one glaring issue that drives me absolutely insane. And basically, this entire section is here because of this one thing, and that is the mantling. It might be one of the worst systems I've seen in an FPS game, and I'd almost rather it not be in the game at all than in the current state it is in. It is just not consistent whatsoever. And the obstacles you can and cannot mantle are not abundantly clear when you're playing the game, which especially sucks in a competitive FPS like Battlefield, because in a fight, I don't have time to test which walls I can climb over. I need to rely on the core mechanics to work in that moment. And maybe I'm crazy, but if the core movement mechanic makes me actively want to avoid using it, I think that's a problem. This can cause you to lose fights when you had a specific gameplay in your head. Now, I do think after a while playing the game, you can get used to it, but it really just, I think it's more of not using the mechanic altogether than learning how to use the mechanic itself. I found myself just avoiding mantling and trying to strategize how I can run away or get behind a rock or something like that, which I should be doing anyways. But if the mechanic's there, I want to use it. Now, it's not all bad. You know, there's some other movement mechanics that I think are pretty well done. I think sprint's well done. I do think power slide is a really cool addition to the game, and it just feels very smooth and good. So I don't really have any general gripes with the playability of the movement mechanics, but I do just really am bothered by this mantling thing. And I think if they could fix this, it would just do wonders for me. But let me know what you guys think. Is mantling a problem with you? This might just be a skill issue on my part, but it would do wonders for me if they could fix this. Okay, so my last section is the destruction. The destruction is kind of the marquee thing for the Battlefield franchise. I think ever since the Bad Company games, this is the big selling point, what got people into Battlefield in the first place, or at least what I think got Battlefield into the mainstream. Now, the destructible environments are present in Battlefield 6, and when it's there, I think it's pretty well done, but the big problem I have is a lot of times it's not there where I think it should be. Now, this is kind of hard for me to adjust to because I have about 500 plus hours in the finals, and I think it's a masterpiece when it comes down to creating these destructible environments. And that's to be expected because a lot of the developers of the finals are developers from previous Battlefield titles. And so the finals kind of feels like the spiritual successor to the Battlefield 4 destructible environments, and it kind of elevates its destruction to another level to feel to such a degree that the destruction truly feels like next gen gaming. So it like feels like Battlefield 4 on steroids. And the biggest gripe I have with Battlefield 6 is like you got this destruction element there, but it feels like you can only ever destroy the facades of buildings and not the whole building together. And sometimes you can destroy the whole buildings together and they fall down, but I think a lot of times, like, and the most prevalent I can think of is New Sobek City, where you have these tall buildings all around that look like something you can destroy. It's just completely indestructible, which is frustrating because especially on Sobek City, there's a whole spot of the map where snipers can just go up on top of these buildings and they can just camp without really any counterplay, aircraft and stuff like that, like helicopters and planes. There's nothing you can do to counter it, where I think would be a really perfect addition to just be able to blow the whole building down. And it really sucks because I think New Sobek City in particular has the potential to be a really great map, but I think by having these indestructible shells to these buildings kind of breaks the immersion and doesn't really stay true to this Battlefield sandbox. In Battlefield 4, there was just a ton of things you could destroy. You could basically destroy almost everything in the bounds of the sandbox of the battlefield. And this is true in the finals today. You can destroy pretty much everything in the finals. And the things that you cannot destroy are pretty obvious. And so you're not really confused as to what things are going to be invincible and what things are going to be things that you can get through and make your strategy and gameplay. Now, of course, I think the obvious counter to my point here is it just takes time to learn the map and you'll learn which areas are vulnerable and which areas are not. But I don't know if that's necessarily good game design, because I want a level 4 player to be able to know that a wall is destructible as well as a level 100 player. You know, I think that's something just very core in Battlefield that needs to be known. You know, you're there for the destruction, and I want new players to experience that kind of destruction. So really overall, I just think the destruction in Battlefield 6 just leaves a lot to be desired. I do think it's better than its immediate predecessor, but I really don't think it holds a candle to games like the finals. And so my suggestion is that they just need to rethink why some walls and some areas are not destructible at all. I think making most of the map destructible in their next game or their next map that they release will be a very beneficial addition, but I do think they need to balance it with it not being so easily destructible that it can be destroyed in 5 minutes. So of course there is a balance there, especially when you have vehicles in the game. It may be a little bit harder to balance, but I do think if we added more destruction, it would definitely benefit the game. So at the end of the day, I don't think Battlefield 6 is some hopeless dead on arrival game. In fact, I think that's what makes this conversation so frustrating. The foundation is definitely there. The gunplay feels very solid. The scale still exists and Battlefield moments still do happen. But when you step back and look at the bigger picture, the community, the UI, the movement, and the destruction, just starts to feel that Battlefield has started to lose sight a little bit of what made it special in the first place, in my opinion. Games like the finals prove that players aren't tired of the chaos and destruction or the sandbox gameplay, and if anything, we're craving it more than ever. But we also want to feel respected as gamers and not treated like walking wallets, not isolated in sterile menus, and not fighting against basic mechanics that should just simply work. Battlefield used to feel like a shared experience, not just a playlist you queue into and forget about an hour later. The frustrating part is that most of these issues don't require reinventing the wheel. They just require the intent to build social systems that keep players around, the intent to create a UI that serves the player before the store, and the intent to polish the core mechanics like movement and destruction to embrace the core vision of what made Battlefield great. So that's all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, like it down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new, and I'll see you guys in the next one.